Hi everyone, Messy Coder back again with another live game dev interview. This time I'm with Unity shader legend Jason Booth, the man behind MicroSplat and MegaSplat. So if you want your Unity terrain to look fantastic, well, this is an interview you need to watch. MicroSplat is free on the Unity Asset Store, but other modules you do have to pay for. The thing about MicroSplat is you pay for what you want. You don't have to get the whole package if you don't need it. This was taken from a live Twitch interview on allthews.twitch.tv/themessycoder, where you can find me every Friday and Saturday having fun on Twitch, and every Saturday I will interview a different developer. The other week we had one of the developers of The Forest, and this Saturday on the 23rd of June we've got Black Horizon Studios, the man behind Emerald AI, Unistorm, Crux, and a load of other stuff as well. So don't forget to catch that. 9 PM UK time, 4 PM Eastern, 3 PM Central, 1 PM is on Central Time. That is this Saturday 23rd of June. Well, 2018 if you're watching this in the future. Hope that helped. So in this video we are playing with our terrains. We want our terrains in Unity to look fantastic, and hopefully you're going to learn a thing or two. So I've split this up into two videos. First part, we're having a chat with Jason, and oh my word, is his background amazing. He has worked on some amazing games. I don't want to spoil it for you, but let's just say that some of the best games in the last 20 years have had Jason's hands all over them. So sit back, enjoy, and I'll see you in a second. Jason Booth, welcome to the stream. Thank you for coming in, mate. Thank you for 4 months worth of chasing. I managed to tie you down. Let me just hand over the microphone to you to introduce yourself to those who might, for some reason, have been living under a rock and they don't know who this legend is. But for everyone else, this is the man, the legend, Jason Booth.
Yeah, I'm Jason Booth. I've been making games for about 25 years. Should I give them the history, or?
I think people would want to hear the history of somebody who's been making games for 25 years, so yes.
Okay. So I was in music school and got really interested in computer animation, and I bought myself an Amiga and started teaching myself 3D animation, and basically ignored school on my last couple semesters, and then saw some people who were trying to start a game company and joined up with them, and that actually became Turbine Games, and we made some of the first MMOs. And then I left there after 10 years and went to Harmonix. I was at Harmonix for 5 years through, like, basically I got there when we started on Guitar.
Whoa, dude, you just skipped all the way through Turbine. Rewind a little bit on the Turbine.
Sure, what do you want to know?
I'm a massive Turbine fan over here. Hi, waving my hand. Give us a little bit of it. What did you work on when you were over there? What was it like?
Well, it was when I first got there, it was in a guy's house, and we basically ended up kicking out his parents so that we could turn it into Turbine. And when I got there, they had a guy in 3D running at about 3 frames a second. And it was all software rendered and a little single-sided, like, shack of a house. And we were deciding basically whether we wanted to make an RPG or a space game. And that year, basically the PC Gamer's RPG of the year was nothing, because there had not really been any. And so we decided to make an RPG, and that became Astron's Call over the next 4 years. And, we didn't have any money at first or anything, and we just started kind of making stuff. And so after Astron's Call shipped, the studio went through a big, it was basically the crash of the internet bubble. And so the studio went through a big transition on the sort of ownership management side. And then I took over as creative director for a little while, which I had a very love-hate relationship with that job. And then decided I didn't want to deal with that side of it. I was more interested in the craft of it. And so on the next game, I basically moved into programming and did, for Dungeons & Dragons Online, I did a lot of the actual, like, AIs and gameplay coding and stuff like that. So after Turbine, I joined Harmonix, and they were doing Karaoke Revolution 4, which was going to be this big project of theirs, and I joined the other team, which did Guitar Hero, and basically started work on that, and did a bunch of systems for like the character animation and sort of the stage stuff. And then that was an unexpected success, and sort of blew up on us. And 2 years later, we were bought by by MTV, and the owner of the name was bought by Activision, a company called Red Octane. And so then we decided we had to make a product to compete with our own product, which is a really weird thing to do, because suddenly you're like, hey, we made this thing, we really love it, and then you're like, how do we make another one which is both different and still awesome and better? So we made Rock Band, and at that point, I think I was heavily involved in the engine design and sort of did a lot of systems for Rock Band, did all the like stage systems and lighting systems and the authoring pipeline for how we authored songs. I was very involved in that. I did like hardware stuff for how we interface with like the lighting controllers and stuff like that, and a bunch of design on sort of improvements to the core engine. And then I left Harmonix after Rock Band 1 and started a company called Conduit, which I only stayed at for about a year, and they were bought by Zynga, and then went back to Harmonix and worked on all the real guitar kind of stuff. And then we did a big engine reboot of the core technology there. And so that was actually one of the more fun things I ever worked on. I spent about a year and a half roughly basically rebuilding the entire like game engine from bottom up, like graphics and everything. And I had a team of like 12 people to do it with, which was really, really fun because we were able to like user test, like we had our artists as like testers to test the workflows and really design out the workflows, because normally you're sort of in such a rush, you just kind of build something that works and you keep building off of that, and then it sort of becomes this crusty architecture. And so to be able to clean it all and start kind of fresh was really fun. And then worked on a bunch of games there. And then I guess it's been about 4 years ago, I started at Disruptor Beam in charge of their client and graphics technology there. They had made a Game of Thrones game based on a web stack, and didn't know anything about 3D or graphics, but knew that they wanted to move into that sort of space. And so I was brought in to build like the art studio and the graphics pipelines and all that stuff. And yeah, that's what I do in the day. And when I have spare time, then I write terrain stuff, usually for Unity or Vertex Painters, things like that.
So let me just pick my jaw up off the floor. So you haven't really done much in the last 25 years, is what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah, not a lot.
I love that. Like, to most people,
I'm a busy guy.
Yeah, to most people, when you're like, even like the turbine stuff would have been like a major career-defining moment. But until I actually pulled you back to go into a little bit more detail, you just skipped right past it. And then for people have to actually remember exactly the kind of stuff that you did. I still remember when Dungeons and Dragons came out. To me, Dungeons and Dragons Online is a new game. That's how my brain still processes games that are being made.
Mm.
I mean, I loved that game. I had so much, it really felt like I was playing a pen and paper RPG, but on a computer. It really, even to like having the dice on the screen was a wonderful touch. But there's so much stuff that you've worked on it's just insane. And Warspawn's written in chat, wow, he was a legend from the Unity stuff before. Now I know he truly is, wait for it, legendary. Yes, he is. And normally I have this list of questions that I ask people, how did you get started, blah, blah, blah. And the interesting thing, it was a fantastic game. Underappreciated, Dungeons and Dragons Online, and little group of 4 people going into a tavern at the end and getting drunk. I loved it. But all of this stuff that you did outside of the Unity engine, well, now you've come into Unity. You've been using it for quite a while now. And I actually still remember when you posted a video of you playing about with lava. Like, was that your first time you were doing anything with shaders and with textures?
No. So the way I got into shaders is when I was doing the reboot of the engine for Harmonix. We had a tech artist there who was a really talented guy named Eric Camara, and he's like, I need a shader graph. And basically, I sort of got into a fight with our management because they were like, we don't have time to build it. It's going to take 9 months and all this stuff. And so myself and another programmer there, a guy named Ike, we built one in 4 days and kind of just skunk worked it. And then it did turn into a real project, but we sort of had to prove to the management that, it's not impossible to build these things. And so I actually learned shader programming from building a shader graph for our artists. And that's when I really got into shaders. I've been into procedural stuff and things like it before, but I learned all my programming on the way. I had a music, I was a music major, so I actually started out in the industry as a 3D artist, and I have zero art training, and I've just learned along the way the things that I've had to learn to figure out what to do. The way I look at all this stuff is I try not to if you have success, that's great, but don't define yourself by it. I think that, to me, the thing that I always try to think about is how a stand-up comedian will go and do their HBO special and then throw everything they've ever done away and never tell those jokes again. And then they have to get up on stage with like 2 minutes of material and try to figure out if it works or not, right? And it doesn't matter if you've had a success before. It doesn't mean your next game is going to be a success. And, there's a lot of different factors out of your control. There's some that are, and so you just keep making stuff. And when they hit, great. When they don't, oh well. Keep making stuff.
That's so true. So, that's pretty deep, man. The swap the beam stuff is quite recent in the grand scheme of things. So, how many years have you been playing about with shaders?
I think it's been on 4.
So
shaders probably 6 maybe.
So from 0 to now, it's been 6 years of you learning something and becoming this guru.
I don't know if I'm a guru, but I explore things and find things, and my skill set I've never thought of as being really good in any particular area. It's more that I'm curious and willing to learn new things and then tie them in with the old things, right? It's often that a lot of my power comes from the fact that I've been an artist and I've been a musician and I've been a programmer and I've been a creative director, so I can actually go in and do and talk the language of different people and sort of pull stuff together and then figure out how to get creative solutions done. But I'm not the best musician you've ever heard. I'm not the best graphics programmer out there. I'm not the best at any of these things.
But you're pretty good.
I think for me, your work is done when it no longer looks like something you did.
Yeah, I get you.
You know what I mean? My wife had this teacher who told her that style is what you're left with when you've removed everything else. And meaning you strip all the things out of you, and then whatever you're left with is kind of your style. And often I find that people don't really like their style, and so you just got to keep pushing at it until you're like, oh, wow, this actually looks really good, and I'm surprised I actually did this. And that's when you're kind of done and ready to move on to something else, or...
We got a question that's... we got actually 2 questions. I'm going to jump past Fresh Meat's question because we're going to come into that later down the line. Fresh Meat, delving straight to the back page of the book. Warspawn's asking, what made you decide to collaborate with Earth Shaping?
He asked me to do it.
That's a good answer.
I mean, he was like, hey, do you want to build a water shader for this tool I'm making? And I was like, sure. If I can write shaders and not have to do the asset store stuff or the marketing stuff or things like that, that's way better for me because I don't particularly enjoy that side of it. I like figuring out how to make stuff look cool.
Cool. Talking about making stuff look cool, we're going to be asking questions throughout our interview and chat. But while we're doing that, let me first of all, before we start delving in, shall I show the demo scene that I've got here of just an example of what we could do with MicroSplat? Do you want to just explain what MicroSplat is
go and load that up.
As I load this up? So what is MicroSplat?
Okay. So MicroSplat is my second sort of terrain shader for the asset store, which is basically a modular terrain system. So you can download the core of it for free, and then you can buy modules that add features to it. And it's based off basically a shader compiling or shader generation tech. And so it can actually regenerate the code for different shaders depending on which things you want it to do. And so it's also kind of a fun playground for me because it means I can like add certain features and things like that in a modular way and not have to clutter the code base. And so it has more features than I think any other terrain shader out there. Like the lava you're seeing here is actually all being done as part of the terrain. There's no special geometry being generated. This is actually the Unity terrain drawing the lava and water and stuff. It does terrain blending. It does triplanar. It does, tessellation. It pretty much has everything you've ever wanted in a terrain shader. And the nice thing about it is that you can just buy the bits that you want for your game. So a lot of these asset store apps become these sort of mega packages where you're like, okay, I pay this amount of money and I get all these things and half of it I don't use or even know how to use. And this is kind of nicer because you can basically like put this on your terrain, it'll look a little better, and then you're like, you know what, I don't like the tiling, let me get the anti-tiling one. Oh, it looks better. Oh, I'd really like some streams or whatever particular feature you're after, and you can just buy that piece and then have that for your game. And if you don't need snow, then you don't need the snow module, right? And so that's actually been really kind of a nice way to do it for a lot of reasons. The only thing that sucks about it is uploading it to the asset store, and if you have all these modules, sometimes they need to be synced to the same version. But otherwise, it's worked out pretty well as a way to sort of make something for the asset store.
I've got a question. Did Unity limit how many of the modules could be on May Madness? All the ones out there.
Yeah, this one kind of bit me. Yeah, so what they did was they set a $20 price minimum. So because I sell everything in these modules, which are lower cost, right? Most of them didn't actually qualify for the sale. But I like that better because it's like you can you can look at each feature individually and decide whether it's worth the money, right? Like you can look at triplanar and be like, oh, is this worth $5 or whatever I sell it for? Is streams and lava worth $20 to me? And what I found when I was doing MegaSplat was that it reached this point where I could add all the features I wanted, but the package was too large for anybody to really make an evaluation about, right?
Yeah, that's what my next question was, like, because I'm still to this day, I always get confused when people ask me what's the difference between MegaSplat and MicroSplat. And people ask, like, oh, if I want all of the modules, should I just go and buy MegaSplat?
Yeah, the answer is no, they're different. So MegaSplat kind of came out of my Vertex Painter. So a while back ago, I just was frustrated about not having a decent Vertex Painter. So I wrote one for Unity and put it up for free on my GitHub. And then I was playing around with this technique that I had for drawing hundreds of textures in a Splat map. And that night of messing around with that is what became MegaSplat. I shipped it about a month later. And MegaSplat is, at its core, a very different technique, but it works on meshes. It works on Unity terrains as well. It's really a mesh technique. It has a very different blending characteristic than traditional terrain shaders because of the way the tech works under the hood, which I could get into if anybody's interested. But it lets you have 256 textures on a terrain, and it only needs one control texture for that, unlike Unity's terrain system, which requires 4 for every for every 4 textures you have, it requires another control map. So it has some efficiency advantages basically around really high texture counts, and I wanted to play with the idea of what does it mean, like what can I do if I have 256 textures available, right? Like what does that open up for me? And So what it really came down to is coming up with new techniques like texture clustering and things like that that allowed me to get a very different feel for the graphics. And I kind of explored. MegaSplat was an exploration through development, whereas MicroSplat I kind of took a different approach, which was like, hey, what do people who use Unity terrains really need and want? And it's really focused on just Unity terrains. And it turns out that not having to worry about it working on arbitrary meshes and things like that actually opened up some new possibilities. So because it didn't have to work on meshes, I'm able to do a lot of things like, hey, I can assume this is a height field, so if I want to do a water simulation over it, I don't have to worry about like arbitrary geometry, right? And so that's why, even though, like, for instance, MegaSplat has a streams and lava component to it, but it only does painted, where you control where it goes. It can't do dynamic because it might be working on a house, and then I have to know something about the topology and all that stuff. Same thing with like terrain blending, for instance. I have a terrain blending module from MicroSplat because, again, I know the topology, so therefore I can store information about that, read it in the shader, and blend things in ways that would be much harder when I'm dealing with an arbitrary topology.
And all this stuff here, like
so
this water coming down, is just, it's random. It's finding its own way. You haven't told it to follow this path. It's just naturally
in fact,
coming
if you
down.
look in the scene, there's emitters for it. You can move the emitters around if you want, and they'll just flow down from wherever they are. So if you switch over to the scene view.
So these big
and I have
blobs
a
at
lot
the top.
This demo.
Wow. And that's it. So basically you're saying here, I want some water to be coming down, and then it just naturally flows along the terrain, wherever it's going to find.
Yeah, it just does a simulation.
And that's,
I store off the height field in my own data structure, and then I basically have some buffers that basically have rules for how it should decide where to move the water to the next cell. It's not physically correct in the way that some other systems are, but it's very, very cheap. And I like doing systems that get the result for very cheap. It's kind of a little fascination of mine. So this actually runs extremely fast compared to if you were actually to do a serious water simulation. I don't know if you play with much water in game engines, but it can be very, very expensive. And so this is a really low cost way to do that type of thing, but it's not quite physically accurate.
That's the thing, that at the end of the day, does it look natural? Does it look like it works how you assume it's working?
Does it look cool?
Yeah. Does it look cool?
Yeah. Nobody cares if it's real. They care if it looks cool.
So at the end of the day, when they go, okay, it looks like it's water flowing down correctly, where it should be, and it is, and it doesn't cost you anything as much as it would do if you were going to have a far more realistic approach. But at the end of the day, I remember I said this the other week with, what was it called? The Ultima, was that? Yeah. The old isometric game, Lord British.
Yeah.
Used to say that they spent so much time developing functionality and logic that was either never used, nobody realized it was there, or basically got overwritten by something else. So people never got to experience it. They just learned that, well, we could just, from now on, we're just making stuff cheaper, and it just assume that it works because it looks like it works.
So I used a trick in Asheron's Call years ago. We had terrible AI in that game. We really didn't even have AI. So basically what I would do is I'd set up a group of monsters, and I'd randomly make one of them point at the player that sort of disturbed things. Okay? And what happened is, on the internet, there were strategies about taking out the leader. And clearly the guy who would point at everybody, while everyone else ran straight to the target, clearly he was the leader. He was holding back and telling them where to go. Right? But there was no AI between any of those characters. Those characters didn't even know the other characters were there. But just because he pointed, players assumed that there was AI around leaders and there were strategies and all these things that weren't really there, right?
You just
game
broken
development is
people's
very
dreams.
much.
You just destroyed.
Yeah.
You've torn back the curtain.
game went offline 2 years ago, so
Right, fresh. I've said fresh meat. I wasn't gonna ask his last question, but he's put a couple of more in. Jason, now he's gone straight in with the. Do you know about Unity's terrain upcoming changes? Now that's a.
I mean, I know
that's a yes/no question.
2000. Yeah, I mean, I know some stuff, but most Unity's really open about anything that they are confident is going to be a thing. They'll talk about it, and they just recently at GDC they were talking about some changes they were going to make to the terrain, basically to move the tools to the GPU and sort of clean up some performance issues and things like that. And then later it's like they've got a team on terrain, and which is great because nobody's touched it in years. And the sort of warm-up task is to clean up what they have, and then they're going to, modernize it at some point.
At some point.
Yeah, I mean, but, they have people actually working on it now, right? Like, one of the things with Unity is that a lot of systems in it stay dormant where nobody touches it for a long period of time.
So when was the last time they
notice the
did
lava
work on it?
out. Huh?
When was the last time they worked on the terrain?
Before I was using Unity.
Wow. So it's been a while.
It's a old style terrain system at this point. You wouldn't build a terrain system this way anymore. So.
Freshman is also asking, do you plan to do your own terrain creation asset?
You mean for like creating height fields and stuff? Like height and splat maps?
Fresh? Like a world creator, competitor, terrain composer, beta?
I mean, so I have actually thought about this a fair bit, but right now I'm trying not to start new projects because I'm about to take off on a 2-month road trip. But the way I have thought about, because there's a lot of like when you look at something like World Creator, right? Like there's a lot of really there's a lot of research behind what they've done with their terrain algorithms. I'm a big fan of their older program GeoControl with its erosion and things like that. And sort of everybody's going up that same sort of thing. So I think if I did one, I would go a very different approach, and I don't know whether it would produce better or worse results. That wouldn't really be the interesting thing for me. For me, it would be just to do something new. And I think what I would do is make it entirely live. So effectively, everything is eroding. You're pouring water on things, pouring sand on things, and everything is happening in real time. And then essentially, you at some point say, "That's what I want," right? Mm-hmm. And maybe can wind back it and things like that. So that's what I've been thinking about, ways to do that, because nowadays with modern desktops, with compute shaders, and sort of how you can feed those into your generation of vertices and all that stuff, you could actually do that all in real time, and it would just be like this big sandbox to play with until you kind of get the world you want, which is really different than the stuff that's out there, which is like graph or dial based or parameter based. But it could be really fun to play with, and kind of its own game in a way. But I haven't really started on anything. One of my problems is if I start something, it sort of becomes like consuming for me, and so I have to be careful about what I start.
You kind of get that impression. VR Game Zone's asking the question that a lot of people are worried about. Will your assets and possibly other assets become obsolete once Unity's terrain comes out?
I don't think it will. I think their main thing that they want to do is fix the underlying engine. I think they will make, I think they'll probably ship a better shader at some point, but I doubt it's going to have like lava and terrain blending and all these things. I think that Unity, like what I like to see from them is to build a solid base that other people can build off of. But there's also this pressure for them to have a complete package the way that Unreal is. And so they kind of get trapped moving back and forth for these. And I think when they just focus on the core of the engine, right, the core of what makes a terrain system work or things like that, that's much more interesting to me because it gives us a lot of different possibilities to take the technology in, like different directions. And that's the work that tends to be lower level and harder to do as like a one-man kind of person, right? And when they try to build complete tools, they tend not to finish them. You look at any of the tools that Unreal has that are, that they now have in Unity, and there's a different level of quality there where Unreal sort of takes things to a much further kind of polish level because they're building active projects on them. And Unity ships, I like the stuff they ship, but I always get this feeling like it's 90% there, and the 10% is just like driving me crazy.
Yeah. Also feels like that 10% is them going, oh, look, we started it, you finish it. Because...
Yeah, well, I don't think it's really that. I think it's that they then they go, this is good enough, and we need to pull the team onto something else now because we have a million things we're trying to do. They know
there's people out there who are gonna develop their own extensions. They know people out there who can plug into it and get what they need out of it. So, and then they've made this whole store out there for those people who do those creations to have a marketplace to be able to distribute it. That's like one of the questions I was going to ask you, like why you started with Unity and not Unreal in the first place.
It was basically at the time that we were making the decision at Disruptor Meme, Unreal 4 was still in like a beta and had no plans or known plans to support like low-end mobile and web-based stuff. So Unity was really the only choice to stay on the platforms that Disruptor Beam wanted to be on, that at least provided more of a tool set than maybe I could build by myself in a short period of time.
What about Talk?
Huh?
There was Talk, and there was that. Oh, what was that other one?
Oh, Torque?
Yeah, there was Talk, and there was one that was all grey.
There's always been other options, but they've always been, they've always had something. Like you look at Torque and Torque Script, and you're like, and the engine's just, it always felt a little not quite ready for prime time there.
We got a couple of questions popped in. Have you any desire to work with characters, like contribute your powers to Uma? I kind of think that would be like what you said a minute ago about it would be all-consuming if you went down that path.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a ton of character stuff. Like I did all the Rockman character creator, makeup, tattoo stuff. Like, did a bunch of, all the procedural animation for those games of how they play their instruments and stuff. Like I did a ton of character stuff. It's just kind of it's hard to do solo.
There's a question. There's a question in there from JLX Hype asking if you've ever made a game, what would it be called? JLX, I'm not sure if you missed the beginning.
A lot of games.
Yeah, at the start of the stream. This guy is one of the founding fathers of Turbine. Made Asheron's Call, Dungeons and Dragons Online. Did you work on Lord of the Rings as well?
Just on the engine side, like basically at that time we were split into two teams. And so there was a Lord of the Rings team and a Dungeons and Dragons team, but we used the same underlying tech. So,
how was the competition like between the two? Was it like a friendly rivalry? Were you guys sneaking into each other's room and sabotaging your work?
No. Usually, what happens when you have two teams is not that the teams compete. Usually, what it is that the Eye of Sauron is on one team and the other team is left alone, meaning that the management of the company is super focused on one team, and essentially, usually, in most cases, they end up destroying that team's progress in some way, and the other team, which is left alone, actually manages to do something pretty cool. And there was a point in Lord of the Rings development where they basically restarted the entire project, kept a lot of the art because they had some beautiful art, but kind of restarted the project because it had gone so badly.
Wow.
And then the Eye of Sauron shifted over to D&D, and they decided that we should ship earlier than we were originally planning to, and that they would take a couple of our best guys and throw a bunch of people from the other team onto our project. And that was right around the time when I left, because that game originally played much more like Prince of Persia: Sands of Time. And then they decided to give it a WoW style click to move kind of thing,
Wow,
which I was not
really?
too happy about. Yeah, and so that was kind of the beginning of the end for me there, where I was like, fuck it, I'm out.
Wow, that's nuts.
Game development, when you have large teams, can become, depending on the culture of the company, it can be pretty brutal. Turbine, I feel like their culture was like grab the ball and run with it until somebody knocks it out of your hand. Harmonix was much better on that sense, but it's very hard to scale from small teams to very large teams and have the culture stay intact and have the things that made the small team work still work on a large team. So
the time you did at Harmonix, did that draw you there because of your music background? I assume so. Was it just a coincidence?
Yeah, I mean, for years people had been introducing me to people there, or been like, hey, if you talk to those guys, and I was kind of like ready to leave Turbine, and so I did an interview there, and then Turbine fired me. And then I basically just took the job at Harmonix like a week later. So it all kind of worked out pretty well. Things had become really contentious at Turbine. They had actually they'd probably once every 6 months had a meeting to decide whether they could fire me or not, because I was pariah of the management there. And for 4 years, the answer was no, until they finally got up the guts. And so then I went over to Harmonix, and it was a very different culture, very experimental, like willing to take risks, which was really nice. And it was run really, really well as a company, which was refreshing. I mean, at one point the CTO came over to me and he said, nobody's gonna like stab you in the back, because he could tell that I was just like, guarding my work, from this like pastime of these turmoil years. I mean, Turbine wasn't always like that. It had some really good years too, but right at the end it got pretty rough. And so Harmonix was a really great place to end up. And I got there at just the right time for what became a 10-year roller coaster ride.
Wow. Fresh Meat was actually saying earlier that he's been trying to get... What game was it, Fresh Meat, you were trying to get hold of? He was trying to get... what game was it? Let's go up here. He's trying to get hold of a game for his wife, one of the ones from Harmonix. There you go, Rock Band.
Oh, Rock Band?
Yeah.
Yeah.
PlayStation 4.
Yeah, they have a Rock Band 4. I haven't... I played so much Rock Band. I mean, I don't need to try 4. I'm kind of interested to watch somebody else play it.
All right, are you going to teach me how to MicroSplat up my life?
Yeah, just go switch over to the blank terrain.
Yeah, so I'm in there now. I'm in the blank.
Okay, so it's pretty easy. Select the terrain.
All right.
And then add the MicroSplat terrain component.
So MicroSplat. This one here, MicroSplat terrain.
Let me look at the other stream, because I'm looking at the Twitch one now.
Yeah, don't look at the Twitch.
I still see lava there.
On the Skype?
On the Skype, I see an old screenshot, so I'm just going to look at your Twitch stream. But yeah,
let me stop sharing.
You add the MicroSplat.
Let me stop and start sharing again.
Okay.
Because Microsoft took over Skype.
They have a timer on it.
Yeah, there's a timer for when.
I was a troublemaker.
Oh, you're a troublemaker. Do you have more stories? You can't ask questions like that. Yeah, you can. That's exactly why.
Yeah, you can. I'm a known troublemaker, and I have no problem with it. Sometimes that's what it takes. You got to get to the results. And companies fall asleep. They do. They sit with a giant elephant in the room, pretend it's not there. because nobody wants to rock the boat.
Spartan's asking, how did you learn to code? Especially with your background, you said you started off as an artist with no training.
Yeah, I started off as an artist and sort of tech artist kind of, and then basically when I was a creative director, I was frustrated because I was spending time just in meetings like managing, publishers and stuff like that. And so I decided I wanted to do like the actual implementation of some of the gameplay stuff, like get really closer to the metal. And I had another guy I worked with named Dan Ogles at the time, very smart guy. And he and I started working on a visual scripting system. And so I used that to write a lot of like animation systems and all kinds of stuff. And then as that project was getting some of the way there, I picked up C++ and just set a couple goals for myself to learn how to do it. And just started writing, lots of C++ code. And then when I got to harmonics, I basically told them, yeah, I know C++, which wasn't really true, which they figured out soon enough. But basically started writing the animation system for the characters, like playing their instruments and stuff for Guitar Hero, and got some really good code reviews from some of the guys there who were really awesome about sort of putting up with me at the time. And I think the reason it worked out doing it on the job like that is because I could always bring something to it that they didn't see, from like understanding how to set up the data or understanding how the art had to interact with the code in a really deep way. So they respected that and sort of would help me out with code until I sort of got on my own feet. And then I switched over to just doing that full time. Probably like 7 of the years that I was at Harmonix, I was basically a coder, and I moved over to the coding department, and then just kind of went from there.
Oh man, that's cool. I love how yeah, I know how to do C++. So how long did it take before they realized?
Well, probably the first code review, but I had stuff working, I had a model working with the data that was animating the characters and doing the things that they needed, and one of the guys there who I really loved working with is a guy named James Fleming, and he used to always have this saying. He would be like, lame ships. And what it basically meant was that, no one really sees your code if it works. And sometimes you have to ship a lame solution because you have to ship games fast, right? We shipped games in a year at Harmonix. We didn't take 4 years to make them. And so sometimes, like, some of the code was like, yeah, maybe this isn't the best solution, but architecturing the right one is going to take too long. Yeah. And so then we, slowly rewrite things to get there. But so I think that sort of combination of having skills in other areas that coders generally don't, and and also just being willing to be like, yeah, show me how to make this better. You know what I mean? Like, so it was, it was great. We've also shifted over to programming languages which, like, for better or worse, are not as brutal about mistakes, right?
Yeah, but I think a C# is too forgiving.
React. Well, I think there's some choices made there to be extremely forgiving that essentially allow you to cover up programming mistakes, right?
Yeah, but isn't that also the reason why people have got bad performance in a lot of their code? Because it's just too forgiving. It looks like it works.
The number one reason that people have bad performance is because they don't understand how a computer actually works. Okay, they understand object-oriented programming. But object-oriented programming is like the devil for performance. It's terrible. And so everything that's in the Unity of like, oh, put this on the update, do this, make a mono behavior, like, is terrible for performance. So the entire industry is pointed in the wrong way. And that's what ECS and stuff is about, no, here's a framework that is designed around performance. And what a processor does well, which is basically zip through linear memory and transform one array of data into another array of data, right?
One's asking, are you an ECS fan?
Yes. I think that Unity is trying to do something which maybe they are the only people in the position to do, which is really bring data-oriented design out into the mainstream.
Is this going to make Unity
And I think that's
compete?
a no. Is it what?
Is it going to make them like finally be a real choice for a high-end competitor against things like Unreal and CryEngine?
Not quite yet. I think they have to get rid of the garbage collector first, and fix that, and then figure out what to do about asset bundles and things like that. But it's certainly a big part of being on that path. The combination of the burst compiler with ECS and the job system allows for performance that's probably going to be better than what most console games are written in C++ allow.
What is tried entitas?
Yeah, that's an entity system.
Okay.
No, because it didn't offer anything for me that I need, in that it doesn't have a compiler that's going to make the code go faster or anything like that. And I tend to write my stuff in a very data-oriented design style when I can, or when I need the performance anyway. So I tend to, it's like the example of like, do you have a bullet game object and you spawn a bullet and then it moves itself around? I tend to do the thing where you have a bullet manager and that's the only game object, and the bullet manager has an array of positions where it's going to draw bullets, right?
Yeah.
And so that allows you to transform things much faster and also have this kind of top-down control scope where you're very explicit about what you're doing. So
we got a couple of questions about the visual solutions for. So, what do you think about visual solutions since you mentioned it, especially for shaders? And Sanya saying, how much can you learn from visual environment for creating shaders? There's a lot of shader questions coming in.
I think shader graphs are great. I think that they are like any abstraction, which is that they make it easier. The main thing that makes it easier with a shader graph is the visual preview on the nodes. But you run into limitations. So whenever you have a domain-specific language, what you're basically doing is saying, I'm going to trade off some level of knowledge that you need to know about how this works to make it easier to use, right? And so shader graphs, if you're like, hey, I want to do something a little bit different on this object, they're like wonderful for that kind of stuff. Like I think that an artist pipeline should have a shader graph in it so that the artist can go and customize things. But I think when you get into, okay, now I've got 500 nodes on this graph, like you're much better using code, and your performance-wise you're much better, and also just organizational-wise, like the graph breaks down. So it really depends on the scale, right, and the use case as to whether, but as a learning tool, or even as a tool to ship shaders of, sort of normal complexity levels, I think they're great. But yeah, for me, I use them to experiment sometimes, but I rarely write anything serious in a shader graph anymore. I just lose too much control.
You're all about the control, mate. So he's saying that Shader Forge is now free, since the developers kind of taken a step back from it. He's saying he wants to learn to use that too. Now, that's a great opportunity now for people who want to dip their toe in the water. So would you recommend Shader Forge as a way for newbies to get introduced? Yeah,
I mean, it's all the shader graphs are very similar. There's also the new Unity one, and there's ASE. I think for Unity, I think ASE has the most polish right now, and it'll actually compile to service shaders for the old pipeline as well as the new LD pipeline. And assuming eventually it'll go to HD, whereas Unities are locked to their scriptable render loop pipelines. And Shader Forge, is a bit older. It's got some crunkiness in it or whatever, but for learning, I mean, they're all fine. There's so much shaders are really about having a bag of tricks and figuring out how to use the data you have in different ways, and so it's the same in any of those.
Well, that's it for the first part of my interview with Jason Booth, the creator of MicroSplat series and MegaSplat. He's the Shader King, the Unity Shader King. on in the next video, he's actually going to show us how we can use MicroSplat, how we can use MicroSplat to create some funky effects on the terrain. And don't forget, if you like these videos and you want to see more, click on that big, red, juicy subscribe button down below. Tell all your friends and neighbours. And also remember that every Friday and Saturday, live on Twitch, all the www.twitch.tv/TheMessyCoder, you can find me streaming, having a good time, interviewing people every Saturday, different developers like Jason Booth here, on my Twitch stream every Saturday from 9 PM UK time, summertime, 4 PM Eastern time, and 3 PM Central, 1 PM Pacific. I really should get that tattooed on my body. So if you do like it, click it. Till next time.
If you want to see more of my crazy videos, click on the left side of your screen now. And down below, there's that big juicy subscribe button, and right next to it is the magic bell that if you click it, it will tell you if I've got a new video coming out. Till next time.